Welcome to the deep dive. So, when we talk about the American Gilded Age, the story usually jumps to the extremes, right? You've got the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, just these massive fortunes.
Right. Or you focus on the flip side, the working poor in the tenements, the struggles on the factory floor. It's
Mhm.
dramatic.
It is. But that picture, it kind of misses this huge transformative group smack in the middle.
Exactly. And, if you really dig into the sources on the structural shifts happening then, that middle ground is where so much of the real story of Gilded Age America unfolds.
That's what we're doing today. For this deep dive, our mission is really to unpack the sources that show how this distinct American middle class just exploded onto the scene, how they were formed, socially, economically, culturally,
Hmm.
and maybe most importantly, how their rise shaped the way the era's super rich thought about their own responsibilities. We're talking about the gospel of wealth.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because the sources suggest this class wasn't just some slow organic growth.
Yeah.
It was almost uh, a necessary invention.
An invention. How so?
Well, think about it. These corporations were getting huge. They just couldn't function with like one owner and 1,000 workers.
Right.
They needed people to manage things, organize, administrate. They needed this new layer, a socioeconomic layer, bridging the gap between the shop floor and the boardroom.
Okay, so it's like a structural requirement of industrialization itself.
Pretty much. Without that middle structure, the whole industrial scale-up probably just stalls.
So let's break that down. This white-collar revolution, as we're calling it, industrial capitalism created these really complex company structures, like
Yeah.
multi-layered hierarchies.
Exactly. You obviously needed the manual labor, but suddenly you absolutely needed supervisors, clerks, accountants,
Hmm.
people to manage supply chains that stretched across the country, national distribution networks, all that stuff.
And that demand creates this whole new category of work, the white-collar employee.
Yeah, and their whole identity was really built on that contrast. They weren't doing manual labor, they worked in an office.
And the name itself, white-collar, points to that.
It does. If you read descriptions from the time,
Yeah.
their status was visibly marked by, suits, ties, clean collars.
Yeah.
It literally set them apart from the grime and sweat of the factory or the mine.
And it wasn't just jobs inside these big companies, was it?
No, that's a great point. Just the sheer complexity of these businesses fueled this massive need for outside support professionals, too.
Like who?
Well, accountants, for one.
Yeah.
People who could actually audit these enormous, sprawling books. Specialized corporate lawyers became essential. Even doctors in healthcare expanded to serve these booming city populations.
Mm.
All of this just added layers, reinforcing the complexity, and it created this fertile ground for the middle class to really take root and expand.
And there's a really key demographic shift happening here too, isn't there, with women?
Oh, absolutely. That need for administrative efficiency, it really cracked open the door for women in the workforce in a new way.
Yeah, it's often overlooked, but it's huge. You get the invention of the typewriter, other office machines.
Right. And suddenly you have thousands and thousands of these clerical jobs opening up.
And women were seen as ideal for them.
Sometimes for reasons we'd find pretty stereotypical today, like supposed dexterity. But often, the sources are pretty blunt. It was also just economics.
They could pay them less.
They could pay them less than men for similar work.
Yeah.
But the impact was still massive. It wasn't just a paycheck. It gave women social visibility, a path out of, say, domestic service.
And teaching too, right. Huge numbers of women went into teaching as public schools expanded.
Definitely. So let's talk money. What was the economic reality for this new class?
Well, the sources show they generally enjoyed, relative prosperity. They weren't rich, but they earned enough to live comfortably.
Better housing, maybe some savings.
And crucially, they often weren't paid by the hour like factory workers. They got salaries.
And that salary distinction, it makes a world of difference, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It gives them a whole different kind of stability.
Yeah, the data confirms that they're real wages. So income adjusted for inflation actually climbed faster than the working class's wages.
So they weren't living paycheck to paycheck in quite the same way, less vulnerable to like a sudden factory slowdown.
Exactly. That stability, it allowed for real upward mobility. Maybe more importantly, it let them plan for the future, for their kids' education. They weren't just getting by. They were building a distinct socioeconomic standing.
Okay, so once you have that stable foundation, that economic base,
Yeah.
the focus kind of shifts, right? It moves beyond just survival.
Right. And that leads us straight into the cultural and educational stuff that really defined this new group. If you've got some economic security, You have the time and, frankly, the mental space to think about self-improvement.
The ideal of self-improvement, that feels very Gilded Age.
Oh, it was everywhere. It was constantly reinforced by the culture. This was the absolute peak of the rags to riches story.
Horatio Alger.
Horatio Alger. Exactly. His books hammered home this very specific set of middle-class virtues: hard work, discipline, clean living, moral fiber. That was the recipe for success.
And the flip side was, if you didn't succeed.
It wasn't the system's fault. It was a personal failing. That was the message.
And this aspiration, it wasn't just in books. The government actually put serious muscle behind it with education.
Huge investments in expanding access to higher education.
Yeah.
Education became this central engine for building the middle class. And it shifted away from just the classical studies that only the elite could access.
You're talking about the land-grant colleges.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Morrill Acts, 1862, then 1890, they were revolutionary. They set up practical universities all across the country, places like Cornell, Texas A&M.
And their focus was different.
Totally different. They weren't primarily teaching Latin and Greek. They were teaching agriculture, engineering, mechanics, even home economics. The practical skills needed for this modernizing, industrializing nation.
Yeah.
It really democratized higher ed for this aspiring middle class.
And it wasn't just about opening doors for white men either. There were specific efforts for other groups too.
Right. For women wanting a professional path, you saw the rise of the Seven Sisters colleges: Vassar, Wellesley, Smith.
Modeled on the Ivy League.
Yeah, modeled on the men's Ivies. And they were explicitly preparing women for roles in teaching, social reform, other new professions opening up.
And we absolutely have to mention the HBCUs here.
Critically important. Historically, black colleges and universities like Howard Fisk, founded in that post-Civil War era, they were absolutely essential for creating pathways for a black professional and middle class.
Providing access that was just denied elsewhere because of segregation and racism.
Exactly. Education was maybe the most powerful tool they had for establishing status and opportunity in a deeply unequal society.
Okay, so let's recap. We've got this growing class, they're educated, they have stable salaries, disposable income, and crucially, thanks to industrial schedules, maybe shorter workdays than before.
Right. More time, more money.
So what do? They start to play. Which brings us to this whole new culture of leisure and consumption.
Yeah, when you look at city life in the sources from this period, it's clear something big changed. You combine rising incomes, electric lighting extending the day, maybe slightly shorter work hours, and boom,
Everything changes.
everything changes. The middle class starts engaging in leisure, but on a mass scale. Organized leisure. That was totally new for most people.
And industry responded. Mass entertainment was basically born to serve them. Think about amusement parks.
Coney Island.
Coney Island is the perfect example. It was like a laboratory for modern fun. Electric lights making night into day, thrilling rides like roller coasters. It was affordable spectacle. It captured that modern urban energy.
And it wasn't just local spectacles. You had things like P.T. Barnum's traveling circuses.
The greatest show on earth.
Right, captivating people everywhere, cities, small towns. And at the same time, you get the rise of organized sports as entertainment. Professional baseball takes off. College football becomes this huge marker of civic and university pride.
Something the average middle-class person could really get invested in emotionally.
Definitely. And for city dwellers, there was vaudeville.
Right, the variety shows.
Yeah, these theaters popped up everywhere, offering this mix of comedy, music, short plays, animal acts. It was diverse, reflecting the cities, but packaged in a way that felt, safe and respectable for a middle-class family outing. Affordable entertainment.
But you argue the really revolutionary shift was maybe something else, something to do with shopping.
Well, the sources really emphasized this blurring line between consumption and leisure. Shopping basically stopped being just a chore you had to do.
And became an activity, an experience.
Exactly. And that's tied directly to pioneers like Marshall Field in Chicago or Macy's in New York, the department store.
Cathedrals of consumption.
That's a perfect description. They were designed to be these grand, alluring spaces. They targeted middle-class women specifically. Shopping became this glamorous social event.
With tea rooms, live music.
Ornate displays, restaurants. It wasn't just about buying stuff. It was an outing. And it empowered those women, both as consumers making choices and also as employees. These stores offered respectable jobs for women.
Okay, so we've painted this picture. A new, educated, aspirational middle class, busy consuming and enjoying leisure, but they exist in the shadow of these just unbelievable industrial fortunes.
Yeah, towering fortunes, which leads directly to this massive question for the guys at the very top, the Carnegies and Rockefellers.
Oh.
What on earth do you do with that much money? Money that dwarfed the budgets of entire countries.
And the answer, or at least an answer, gets formalized in this philosophy, the Gospel of Wealth, most famously laid out by Andrew Carnegie himself, right, in that 1889 essay.
Yep. He argued pretty forcefully that the wealthy had this moral, almost religious duty to basically give away their surplus wealth for the public good during their lifetimes.
So the core idea was what? Wealth as a trust.
Essentially, yes. It wasn't really their personal property in the usual sense. It was like a divine trust. They were just trustees, holding and managing this capital for the benefit of society as a whole.
Okay, but here's the key distinction, and it feels very Gilded Age. It wasn't about just giving cash to the poor, was it?
No, not at all. Carnegie especially was vehemently against that. He called it indiscriminate charity.
Why? What was his reasoning?
He believed that just handing out money bread, dependency, laziness, moral decay, he thought it was wasteful and counterproductive.
So what was the right way then, according to this gospel?
True philanthropy, the responsible way, was to fund permanent institutions, things that would allow individuals to improve themselves.
Ah, the self-improvement angle again.
Exactly. Build libraries, universities, museums, parks, concert halls. Things that provide the tools, the ladder, for people to climb up through their own hard work and merit. Opportunity, not handouts.
Give a man a fish versus teach a man to fish, but on an institutional scale.
Kind of, yeah. And this idea wasn't just Carnegie. It was echoed everywhere. You had preachers like Russell Conwell giving his famous Acres of Diamonds sermon literally thousands of times.
The one that basically said being rich was proof of virtue.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
That acquiring wealth was not only possible for anyone willing to work for it, but it was practically a Christian duty and a sign of God's favor. It framed wealth accumulation as a social good.
And the results of this philosophy, I mean, they're literally set in stone all around us, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. The scale of the institutional philanthropy was staggering. Carnegie himself funded thousands of public libraries across the country, plus Carnegie Mellon University, Carnegie Hall in New York.
Just transformative stuff.
And Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller, yeah, from Standard Oil money, he founded the University of Chicago, basically from scratch. And the Rockefeller Foundation, which became this massive global force in public health research and medical education. Very systematic, large-scale giving.
And it wasn't only those two giants, right?
No, lots of others. You had figures like Phoebe Apperson Hearst, using wealth from mining, focused on women's education, suffrage movements. Washington Duke, tobacco money. Endowed Trinity College, which then became Duke University.
There's also a really unique story, Bridget Biddy Mason.
Yes, that's a vital example. Biddy Mason was formerly enslaved. She won her freedom in court, worked as a nurse and midwife, saved her money, and made incredibly smart real estate investments in early Los Angeles.
And became quite wealthy.
Became one of the wealthiest people in the city. And she absolutely used her fortune philanthropically. She was key in founding the first African Methodist Episcopal Church, the oldest black church in L.A., funding schools, orphanages, other local charities.
So that philanthropic impulse, that idea of using wealth for the community, it wasn't only the domain of the white industrial titans.
Absolutely not. Her story shows that drive existed across different communities, even among those who started with absolutely nothing.
Okay, but here's the rub, right? There's a massive contradiction lurking beneath this whole gospel of wealth idea.
Oh, yeah. This is where it gets really complicated, and it defines the paradox of the Gilded Age. All this amazing philanthropy, these incredible institutions,
Yeah.
critics at the time, and the sources are full of this, immediately pointed out how these fortunes were made in the first place.
Through practices that weren't exactly benevolent?
To put it mildly, we're talking about suppressing unions, sometimes violently, paying incredibly low wages, forcing people to work in dangerous, often deadly, conditions in the mines and factories.
So the money funding the library came from the same system that was exploiting the workers who might use that library.
Precisely. The benevolence was funded by the exploitation. The philanthropy aimed to smooth over social inequality, maybe provide paths out of it, but the accumulation of the wealth often deepened those very inequalities.
Wow, that's quite the tension. Improving society with funds generated by arguably harming society.
It's the central paradox. Progress and poverty, philanthropy and exploitation, all tangled up together.
So let's try to pull this together. We've traced this journey from the rise of the white-collar worker as almost a necessity.
Right, driven by corporate scale.
Through the creation of this educated, consuming middle class with its own culture of leisure and self-improvement,
Hmm.
all the way to these enormous fortunes that spawn this really complex and deeply contradictory philosophy of the gospel of wealth.
Yeah, the whole landscape of America changed incredibly fast.
Yeah.
From mostly agrarian to industrial, managerial, consumer-driven, all within a few decades. It really set the template for the American dream aspiration for generations.
And that Gilded Age answer to massive wealth, the gospel of wealth, it fundamentally framed moral responsibility, not as direct aid, but as funding institutions, opportunity over charity.
Or build a library, not give bread.
So we have to leave you, our listener, with this final thought to chew on. The Gilded Age basically told the poor, look, we're not going to give you cash today, but here's a library, here's a university, go improve yourself for tomorrow. How much does that foundational tension, prioritizing long-term structural opportunity versus addressing immediate critical human need, how much does that still shape our arguments about wealth, inequality, and philanthropy today?
Definitely something to think about. Until our next deep dive.